Just want to remind you, while we're waiting for other folks to join us, that this meeting is being live streamed by AOC. So just be aware that we're all on video and that this is going to be captured for posterity and that you can watch it again on AOC if you want to. So, and again, welcome everybody. As Lee mentioned, please, if you have access to the chat feature, drop your name and your information in there. And as I said, we'll get started in just a minute. again, welcome everyone. I'm Melinda Taylor. I am the executive and also co-chair with Lee of the Acadiana Housing Alliance, which is a member of the Housing Louisiana network of housing alliances representing regions throughout our state. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that later, but we have a very special guest with us today who'll be introduced a little later. Very excited to have him join us and to hear what he has to say. So without further ado, just welcoming people, reminding you once again, as usual, to please mute your phones or your equipment if you're not speaking, so we won't get background noise. And if you have questions or any comments or anything that you'd like to share with the group, feel free to use the chat feature to do that. And again, a reminder that this meeting is being recorded by AOC. So welcome. And the next item on our agenda, which you can see now on the screen, is some key member updates. And I'm going to go ahead and let Lee and Elsa give the first update from ARCH.
Hey everyone, this is Lee Rochelle, Executive Director for ARCH. We have been providing updates as we've gone along with the folks that are in the COVID non-congregate shelter hotel program. So we are down to about 85 households remaining in that hotel program as we help each of those households secure housing. We have already about 150 households that are in housing with case management support to help them maintain that housing and are looking to help the remaining households access housing within the next approximately 3 months, so that hotel program would be closing down, sometime in that time frame. It is one of the main opportunities for shelter right now. And so we are also looking in this community for opportunities to expand shelter as that one program closes, what could take its place for shelter options. And so working with some community partners to find an interim solution for housing and watching some of the federal resources that could potentially be used to establish additional shelter that our community really does need. The other thing that is a new resource in our communities, both in Lafayette Parish as well as in Evangeline Parish, that we're real excited to see beginning to be facilitated. They're not operational yet, is that the HUD has released some new guidance for what they're calling emergency housing vouchers. And as I mentioned, both Lafayette and Evangeline Parish will be receiving those, and it will probably be around August when those will be available. And ARCH will coordinate with those housing authorities for the use of those vouchers. So all told, our community will receive an additional 52 subsidized housing units, which will be available for those who are experiencing homelessness. So that's some good news on the horizon. I think that's it for my updates at this time.
Thanks. And does anybody have any questions for Lee? There's a lot going on right now with the emergency rental assistance programs, and we may talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm next up on the agenda for just a quick update from Lafayette Habitat for Humanity. And the good news is we're getting ready to start 10 more new homes that are funded by a grant that we'll be receiving through the Louisiana Housing Corporation. And 6 of those homes will be in the Macomb-Bizet neighborhood where we've been focused, but 4 of them will be in the Laplace area, which is a new partnership, although we've long been in contact and actually built our first home there many years ago. That the neighborhood north of downtown will be building some homes there. So very excited to get that started. And on the in other news side of things, our office flooded last week during the heavy rain on Monday night. And so we're displaced, and I'm coming to you from the campus of LPTFA, the Lafayette Public Trust Finance Agent or Authority. And a really loud train just passed the office, so I'm hoping that that's all for this hour, but just fair warning, you may get some kind of extreme background noise over here, but this is a great space and we really appreciate their providing it for us. I believe we've got, I'd like to go on to the emergency rental assistance program update and then circle back to what's next on the, actually I see the core teams next on the agenda. Just want to quickly mention that, as I mentioned earlier, we're part of a larger network of housing alliances that make up Housing Louisiana, a coalition of partners. And that group just met this morning for a planning meeting, a semi-annual meeting, and there are going to be some upcoming events around that. And in particular, for those of you who are aware of and engaged in the housing development arena, there is a plan, the QAP, the qualified, I can't remember what it stands for now, for low-income housing tax credits, qualified allocation plan, sorry, that the state puts out every year that basically sets priorities for how they're going to allocate low-income housing tax credits for affordable housing development. And comments are in the process of being submitted on this year's plan, which as it stands in draft form actually gives, I think, privileges mixed income development, when I think all of us know, and certainly the consensus on the call this morning was that more deeply affordable housing is needed, up to and including 100% affordable housing developments, and that those should not be penalized or not be allocated funds to develop in favor of mixed income, which generally meets the housing needs of a higher income level. So that's happening. A lot of people just expressed extreme concern about the funding that's coming down through the American Rescue Plan Act and other streams of federal funding, stimulus funds basically coming down now, and the fear that those funds are going to be used by local communities for things other than affordable housing primarily, and that housing is not being elevated to the degree it needs to be in the conversations around use of those funds. And the need for all of us to take on a really strong advocacy role in insisting that housing be seen as infrastructure and as essential and not bypassed in favor of other capital projects that might be on the radar of local governments and municipalities who'll be receiving these funds. So that's a really quick summary of what was basically an hour and a half long conversation, but there will be more. And for those of you who are interested, we'll be getting out information about meetings of Housing Louisiana, but for state level concerns and for national level information about issues in affordable housing, that's a really good resource. And you'll be getting more information from us, from them, about how you can engage with advocacy locally on national issues. So sorry, that was long. I'll go ahead and turn it over now for updates on the emergency rental assistance program. Andy, are you with us for that this morning, or this afternoon rather?
I can give a little bit of an update, not the whole picture of everything, but I can definitely give a little bit of what's going on. So far, and these are numbers from, I want to say it was Thursday last week. We had sent some numbers to the city because we report weekly on it from a Thursday, well, really from Friday to that Thursday, what we've done. It was for Catholic Charities, we had almost 1,100 applications that were started. We had 549 of them that were submitted to us. That means that they had enough information for us to be able to start doing callbacks for things that we need to be able to process the cases. We did do help with 23 cases that week, and that brought us up to, and I forget what the total is. Oh, I can give you another number in a second. For that week, and then we had expended, it was right about 100,000 for those 23 cases that we did that week. To date, for Catholic Charities, what we've done is approximately 200 households so far, and that is a total of about $1.2 million that we've given out to those households, which is right about an average of $6,000 a household or something like that, somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000 a household we're averaging. We are getting new cases, about 50 that actually have enough information for us per week to be able to help more. So we still have a stockpile, obviously, of cases that we're whittling through, trying to get as many out as we can. We set a limit because we don't really want to put ourselves too far behind the 8 ball of about we want to try to get $250,000 out a week. And that's what we've basically averaged over the last 5 weeks. So we set that goal to be able to get this money expended as fast as we can. Now, I do want to say that I helped get Smile up to date last week, and they had somewhere in the neighborhood of, at that point, 250,000 out, I want to say. So they probably got somewhere between that and 500, I'd say, now as of this week. So probably between the two agencies, we're probably in the neighborhood of about 1.7 million out that we've had in assistance. And then we found out yesterday, so we were on a call with the state program for the other parishes in our region, because we only administer stuff in Lafayette, but they did give us a little bit of an update that between, we added all the different other parishes together, and between all the 7 other parishes, they've spent about $400,000. And I want to say that was approximately 60 families they helped throughout the different parishes in our region. And I think that's really all I have right now.
That's a lot, Andy. Thank you. And actually, I don't know, is Marcus Harris on this call? I don't know if anybody from Smile is with us because I can't see all the participants, but I will say he was on the Housing Louisiana call this morning and gave a quick report on what they have done so far. I believe they've gotten 2 weeks worth of funding out to families, and he said $260K plus $170K, I believe.
I was pretty close to what I was thinking.
So you were just about right on, Andy. Good job. You are the data person. But
Melinda.
Yes.
Yeah, he isn't in at this time, but you're all correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he also said, he went over the requirements of the program a bit, and it sounds like they're moving forward pretty rapidly with it. And he had another meeting, I think, at 11 to discuss some particulars around that. But that's great news for.
And there's actually a lot more funding coming down too. I mean, there's actually a second round of ERA that's coming down with even less restrictions, it seems like. So we're waiting on more guidance from that, and then the state actually has an allotment also, because we got 7.1 straight to Lafayette, and they actually have another 9 million at the state that we're working on to be able to get that down for additional funding for our area for rental assistance. So there's definitely a need and once we get through these initial, once the applications that were submitted, we're going to start making calls to the ones that we can out of that 1,100 that we have so far. So we definitely got plenty of applicants and plenty of need in the area. So hopefully we'll be able to get most of that taken care of with the funding that's being thrown to us.
So yeah, that's much needed in the community. And then moving on, unless anybody has any questions for Andy. All right, well, moving on then to the AHA core team subcommittee team meetings. Elsa, did you want to mention something about the schedule there?
I just wanted to say that if you're interested in serving on any of the 3 committees, and right now the 2 active ones are housing counseling services and one on data collection and dashboard development, please shoot me an email, shoot Melinda an email, shoot Lee an email, and we'll make sure that you get engaged. The next subcommittee team meeting that I'm aware of is June 7th. That's a Monday. And that is the data team will be re-meeting, and I'll be sending out an email before the end of this week with any pre-work that we've all agreed to do before we meet the next time. So just with some gentle reminders. So again, that's June 7th, that's a Monday, and we will be meeting virtually. It seems to work a little bit better for everyone.
All right, thanks, Elsa. And would you like to just go ahead and roll with introducing Maxwell?
I would love that. Yeah, I would love to introduce Maxwell Gr Dulo, who's the Director of Policy and Communications for the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. He's an urban planning and public health professional who believes that smart public policy and planning work can equitably build wealth in disinvested communities. With over a decade of nonprofit and public sector experience, he has policy advocacy experience at all levels of government and has managed and executed community outreach strategies for diverse communities in Washington, D.C., New York, Western Massachusetts, and New Orleans. He has specific expertise in fair housing and affordable housing policy, community land trusts, safety net health systems, drug use and sex work harm reduction programs, and HIV prevention and sexuality education programming. He holds a master's degree in regional planning from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Maxwell Gr Dulo.
Thank you so much, Elsa, and thank you all for having me. I was not expecting that that long bio, but I appreciate it. It was really exciting to hear y'all's updates and all the things that you're working on. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about our organization and some of the work that we've been doing. And Lee and Elsa asked me to sort of throw some action items out there where they're relevant, and actually just hearing some of the things y'all were talking about sort of brought up a few others for me. So I can drop those in the chat as we go. And feel free to throw questions in the chat as they come up as well, and I'm happy to answer things as we go. So I'm with the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, which is a 26-year-old nonprofit civil rights organization. We serve the entire state, but are based in New Orleans. And our mission is to eradicate housing discrimination and segregation. And we do that through a couple of different ways. We offer pro bono legal support to people who faced discrimination. And that's based on the protected classes at the federal level. So race, color, national origin, religion, disability, family status, which is whether or not you have children, and sex, which the Supreme Court recently ruled includes sexual orientation and gender identity as well. And we do investigations too, and we're trying to expand those to across the state. And what I mean by investigations is that we send out like equally paired mystery shoppers to sort of mystery shop landlords and real estate brokers and other folks to see how if people get treated differently based on their race or whether they have children, disabilities, et cetera. And so that's like a different service that we provide, and we issue reports based on those findings. We also do a lot of outreach and education around the state to teach people about their fair housing rights and obligations. We do foreclosure prevention counseling around the state. So if you happen to find folks who are in trouble there, you can always refer them to our agency. We have a full-time foreclosure prevention counselor on staff. And then we do policy and advocacy, and that's my job. And when it comes to that, we really think of discrimination and segregation broadly. I think a lot of the more obvious discrimination that folks may think of is something that we may have seen more so in the past, although we still see it today. But we also think about policies that disproportionately impact people of color, women, people with disabilities, et cetera. And that's our entry into a lot of the policy that we've been doing since COVID, especially where we really shifted our priorities to make sure that we are trying to help families stay in their home. And we're really working really hard to try and stop or slow down evictions, right? And that's something that the research both locally and statewide and nationally shows disproportionately impacts Black women in particular. And sort of in a similar way to that our criminal justice system disproportionately impacts Black men, sort of at every step of the process. And we've done that because we knew that housing was a matter of life and death during COVID. And that's something I know that you all saw, especially early on. We knew that if people were pushed out of their homes, they were going to end up doubling up with friends and family, and that exposed more people, often more elderly people, as you saw intergenerational households and crowding. And actually, there's been some research to sort of prove our fears right, unfortunately. But some data was published in January that suggested that 40% of all COVID deaths were related to evictions. So if you can imagine that, they essentially modeled that if we had strong eviction protections in place from the beginning, we could have saved 40% of all the lives of people who died from COVID. So it's hundreds of thousands of people and thousands of people across the state of Louisiana. So that's why we do this. And so some of the work we've been doing since COVID has involved initially pushing the state to offer hotels to unhoused people so that they could isolate and socially distance. I know that's something that Arch was sort of on the leading edge of and really made use of more than a lot of other places, even in the country. And yeah, Lee, I can definitely share. I'll drop the study into the chat. It's sort of mind-blowing when you think about it. I'm a housing person. I think housing is the solution to everything, but even I didn't think it was going to be that stark. Just 1 second here. So I'll drop that in a second. There you go. So we worked to try and make sure that hotels were available for unhoused people. We worked to preserve eviction moratoriums as long as possible. We're still very concerned about what's going to happen when the CDC moratorium expires at the end of June. There were a lot of legal challenges, and those have mostly been put on hold while they're being appealed sort of up the courts. But I'm pretty pessimistic about whether the Biden administration will extend the CDC moratorium another month or two. And so I think we should all be prepared for courts open full in July. And I really appreciated your update, Andy. We've been working really closely with the state's rental assistance program, with the city of New Orleans, with Jefferson Parish, with East Baton Rouge Parish. We reached out to everyone, and we actually reached out to the sort of Lafayette city leaders and never heard back, but I would love to talk more. Yeah, you don't seem surprised by that. I would love to talk more about what that can look like, because one of the things that we really tried to do was try and bring some basic renter protections into the policies and programs, and try and make sure that those programs were operating as efficiently and easily for folks who are certainly going to be in crisis and sometimes have trouble gathering documents and filling out applications. So my information's in the chat, but I'd love to connect. It sounds like y'all are doing a great job. I know everybody's sort of working as hard as they can with the resources we have, but I'm deeply concerned about what's going to happen come July, because I don't think we're going to have administered all of that money. It's not clear to me that landlords understand that if they evict, they are not eligible to get their back rent paid. So I think we still have a lot of work to do locally and nationally around that.
Yeah, we had a call with the state yesterday, the people running the program, and that's one of the things is if they're evicted, then yeah, no payment. That's an unfortunate thing they don't realize.
Yeah. So I'll talk briefly about some of the things that we've been really focused on, especially some of our work with Arch that we've been doing lately. We've been talking a lot about sort of how this acute crisis acute housing crisis that COVID has caused, with people losing their homes, being put out on the street, losing all their belongings and eviction. But we've been trying to sort of think about the long term here as well, because we know that when people have faced eviction, sometimes even if they just have an eviction on their record, but it doesn't actually, move all the way through the court process, that record can show up when they apply for housing in the future. It can show up if an apartment building runs their credit or runs them through a tenant screening program. Any rent debt that's been reported to a collection agency can show up, and those can all deny someone housing in the future, and not just in the future now, but in the future for years into the future. That can be the case. And I know that Lee has actually been a part of our work on this and has come up to the legislature a couple times to talk about this and share the stories of Arch clients who have been denied housing because of this and lost their application fees in the process. And so this is something we've been very concerned about, sort of prolonging our economic crisis. If you're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands potentially of households that will have difficulty finding housing and even jobs, because they run your credit for jobs sometimes too, into the future. And so we started in October and brought a bill at the state legislature that would have sealed those eviction records at the courts if they were during COVID. That didn't pass. So we filed a resolution to create a study. We studied this more. Folks came back up in January, including some families who had been evicted, bravely told their stories in front of the legislature. And we tried to tackle this a different way. And we ended up having to work with the apartment lobby, the apartment association, the realtors lobby, the credit reporting lobbies. These are not the sort of folks, if they oppose your bill, that you get things done at the legislature, but we were able to broker a compromise after a lot of hard work. And what that looks like is ensuring that when people apply for apartments where they're charged a fee to apply, that those landlords are going to have to disclose some things before they pay that fee. And they're going to have to disclose whether they consider your credit score, whether they consider eviction records, whether they consider criminal records, so that people at least know what they're being graded on before they pay, and can make a decision about whether it's worth spending that money. And then also they're going to have to include a question on their application that allows people who have been evicted or experienced financial hardship due to like a state or a disaster or an emergency to share some context, to say, yeah, I did get evicted during COVID. It was COVID related. I never missed rent before, but I lost my job and I couldn't keep up. So that it's not just a faceless algorithm from a tenant screening company that's making that decision, that there's some actual context that a landlord can consider as well. So that bill is moving. It's made it all the way through the House, the Louisiana House, and is awaiting a final vote in the Louisiana Senate, which should hopefully happen next week. And so the first thing I'm going to share with y'all in the chat is we have a system that creates these sort of one-click action alerts. So that link, if you click it, will take you to a landing page where you can put in your information, your address and name, and it will auto-generate an email that will send directly to your state senator. So if that's something, and there's a little explanation there about exactly what happens, but if that's something y'all feel open to doing, we would love your support. And if you're interested, the full bill text is also here. Just another quick note, this is, we're working on another bill that'll be somewhat related, I imagine, for a lot of the people you serve, which is to protect survivors of sexual assault, which is particularly relevant right now, as we've heard about all the sort of sad news coming out of LSU this year. And so, excuse me, I'm trying to do two things at once. And so that bill would allow sexual assault survivors who don't feel safe in their apartments anymore because maybe they were assaulted in their home and it's a really traumatic experience, or the person who assaulted them knows where they live, to work with a sexual assault provider to fill out a form and request the opportunity to break their lease early without penalty. So that bill actually made it all the way through, and just requires a signature from the governor, which I think we'll get. So that's just another thing, another protection that's coming down this year, which we're really proud of sort of helping with. And then the other thing that we're working on really closely with ARCH right now, someone mentioned the Louisiana Housing Corporation and their qualified allocation plan, QAP process, right, which is how they decide where they're going to give out all their affordable housing dollars to the folks who build affordable apartment complexes across the state. It's a sort of opaque and nerdy process that mostly developers engage in, and it's not super open or accessible to sort of the general public, and certainly not to the people who are the end users of affordable housing, actual low-income families. And one of the things that we've seen over the years is that one of the major barriers is people who have criminal records. And this is sort of similar to eviction records, right? It's a way that people get screened out when they apply for housing. And it's one thing if it happens on the private market, but at the very least, we believe that that should not be the sort of thing that happens when the state is actually paying for the housing. That when the state is paying, they are responsible for creating some equity in that process and making sure that people with really old criminal records or people with nonviolent records who've served their time shouldn't be discriminated against because of that record. And so we are working with a coalition of folks, homeless service providers, criminal justice reform groups, and others to try and influence that process and ensure that moving forward, developers who take this money have to have a more inclusive criminal background screening policy. It's something that we've seen the Lafayette Housing Authority did recently. The Housing Authority in New Orleans has made this kind of reform recently, and we've seen that kind of success. We've also done I mentioned we do these housing investigations, and we've done an investigation on this where we sent out equally paired testers who had the same income, same background, but one was white and one was black, and they both would approach property managers and say, "Hey, I have this misdemeanor on my record, or I have this felony on my record. Can I still apply, or will I get denied?" And as you might expect, white folks were told, "Oh, it's no big deal. Everybody makes mistakes. Go ahead and apply. You should be fine." And the black people were told, they were discouraged from applying and told that it's likely they would be denied. And that happened in about 55% of the cases that we tested in. So we know this gets applied in a racially discriminatory way as well. So that's something that we are working on now, that process to finalize the qualified allocation plan is happening. The first public community engagement or public meeting that's open to the public is June 3rd. And that's an in-person meeting, but if anyone is interested in submitting comments on that issue, I'm going to drop the email where you can send those comments in the chat, along with just some basic talking points for anyone who's interested. They're accepting those.
Could I jump in for just a second and say that Housing Louisiana is actually also drafting a response letter to the QAP. So, there's other people also working on that. So.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, they're part of the group that is working on the criminal backgrounds part as well. And actually, Melinda, I'm really glad you brought up. I apologize if it's loud here. They're doing road construction outside my house. But I appreciate the part you brought up too about how they incentivize it so that there are less affordable units in a lot of the buildings, which doesn't make any sense to me either. And so we're going to be commenting on that as well. But yeah, if that's something that anyone is interested in, feel free to use those talking points, put it in your own words, or however you like, but you can submit an email that way. And that's another way to support this work. And then I'll come back briefly. You talked nationally too, Melinda. We work with Housing Louisiana as well. And one of the things our national partners, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, is doing is really trying to generate a lot of attention about the infrastructure bill that Congress is negotiating right now to make sure that housing is a part of that infrastructure bill. And they've got a couple of really high priorities. And, I know folks don't always expect our two Republican senators to sort of be in the midst of those negotiations, but Senator Kennedy does sit on the Appropriations Committee, and Senator Cassidy has in the past sometimes taken positions that are in support of housing funding. And we have a good relationship with his office. So I think it is important and I think useful to have organizations from Louisiana signed on in support of these priorities. So I'm going to put the national sign-on letter in the chat as well. And that's something that that any of your groups who are interested can click that and sign your organizations on. I know that's something that we've been trying to help them do, is sort of bump up the organizations who are based here in Louisiana on that letter so that we have something of a presence and they know that we're paying attention. There was a letter recently that we submitted, and it was about trying to make sure that we are dealing with this issue about eviction records following people around for years to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And I think there were as many Louisiana organizations as there were California organizations on that letter. It was really impressive. So I think sometimes we really show up and show out. So this is like another opportunity to do that if folks are interested. And then I'm going to come back to that's mostly what I wanted to talk about. So I'm happy to come back to some of these questions in the chat. So what's the situation with people with disabilities? Are their experiences similar to other minorities? That's a good question. So the top three sort of bases for discrimination that we see are racial discrimination, families with children, and people with disabilities. And people with disabilities, that often looks like landlords who won't let someone have a service animal, or won't allow some sort of reasonable accommodation and a policy. So let's say we had to sue a landlord in Covington or Slidell because a woman became seriously disabled while she was living in an apartment building, and she was on the second floor and they didn't have an elevator. And so she asked to move to an open first floor apartment, and they wouldn't let her do it. And she made multiple asks, and we sent threatening letters, and they wouldn't allow her to do it. And we finally had to sue them in order to get her to have a unit on the first floor. She had called the St. Tammany Fire Department like 100 times in the past year because they were like carrying her up and down the stairs so she could go make groceries and things. So like those are some of the examples of like the cases we take around people with disabilities. And that is a place where we still see quite a bit of discrimination. Policy is great, but both apartment complexes and private landlords are still denying clients based on criminal history. Yeah, I have no doubt. It's something that we see quite a lot. And I think it's going to be a long fight on this one, I think. Trying to pass a state law that would prevent that kind of discrimination will be really difficult. And so the tack that we're taking right now is trying to get at least the state government to say when we're paying for affordable housing, we're not going to allow this to happen, and get local governments to do the same. So we're working with the city of New Orleans. We're working with and start engaging with East Baton Rouge and their public housing authority. If there are people in the city of Lafayette, the Lafayette Housing Authority has already done this, but if there are people in the city of Lafayette that you think would be interested in having that conversation, we would love to have that. And I think once we can show people that it works in the public sector, then I think we can start to make that argument about expanding to the private sector. But I understand you all work with individual people who need housing now, and that's not always helpful. So I hear you. I'm happy to take other questions, and I'm going to drop one more thing in the chat. I appreciate y'all sticking with me on the overwhelming amount of information I'm dropping in here. But this is just the link to sign up to our newsletter. So if you want to keep getting information about the work that we're doing, or receive our action alerts about moments when it makes sense to contact your legislators, that's a place you can sign up. We'd love to have you.
Yep, this is great information. Thank you so much for sharing. I think I have like 1 million tabs open in my browser right now because I keep clicking on your links. But Elsa is, in case you can't see the chat, has said she will compile all the links from the chat and send them out to everyone, so you'll have access to them if you don't right now. So no fear. And Maxwell, on the meeting this morning with Housing Louisiana, there was mention of a special meeting for public input about the QAP, and they gave the date as June the 7th for a listening session of some kind. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So the meeting in person is June 3rd, and that was the only one we knew about for weeks. Like I said, they're not real great about sharing information and making things accessible. I apologize if there's anyone from the LHC on here. It's not everyone there. So June 3rd is the meeting in person. And then they recently shared that there will be a virtual meeting on June 7th. So that is another opportunity for people to submit comments and sign into that. I haven't seen the time for that yet, though, or like the link, the Zoom link.
Yeah, I don't have it yet, but as soon as some of us get it, we'll make sure that everybody gets notice who may be interested in participating. And it's interesting just to listen in and, you know, sometimes hear developers' perspective on this, developers who are from the private sector. And, you know, sometimes their thinking is quite different than the way we may be thinking, and the concerns they have are different than some of our concerns as practitioners. So, yeah.
Yeah. I see a question, is Calcasieu Parish a part of this? So Calcasieu Parish is they're part of the state low-income housing tax credit program, and that program is open to developers from across the state. So Calcasieu Parish would be eligible for, you know, a developer to build a state-funded affordable housing development in that parish. And Calcasieu Parish is also one of the 7 larger parishes that is operating its own rental assistance program. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but that's what I know there.
If anybody else has any questions and you want to take yourself off of mute and ask them, you feel free to do that, or you can put it in the chat if you prefer it that way. I think you have to, if you're on a phone, you have to *6 to unmute yourself. While people are kind of thinking of questions or putting them into the chat, I just want to say that Arch has worked in partnership with or in response really to the requests from the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center on a couple of occasions to respond to the issues before the legislature. And so I'm very grateful for their work at leading some of these advocacy efforts to get some of these bills through. And Maxwell in particular has been tenacious in finding ways to make it work and to pull all the parties to the table and to find the compromise to still serve the tenants that we're trying to assist. And so thank you, Maxwell, for your work personally, but also for the work that the center is doing across the state. It's been really eye-opening to see what the possibilities look like when we kind of pull our voices together and find the compromise. It's been great to watch.
Thank you, Lee. It's been lovely to work with y'all.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I don't see anything else coming in the chat, and I haven't heard anybody. We do have a little bit of time left on our agenda for other announcements. So if your group has something going on, or you want to share something else, or you, if there's just something else you wanted to talk about, then now's the time for any other questions or announcements.
Someone did put this in the chat, and I want to raise it to everybody's attention that there is a meeting on July the 6th at the Lafayette Housing Authority. It's a public hearing or a public meeting on their, I believe, the annual plan, and lots is happening there. I'm just quickly going to, let you all know that there was a vote at the meeting on Tuesday, which was rescheduled from Wednesday, which would be the normal date, that elevated the current interim executive director to the executive director position. Some concerns were expressed about this, and but that's what it looks like moving forward. And of course, there's a lot going on with the need for more development of both existing units and new housing there. So I would encourage everybody who works with people or has interests in working with folks who access services from the Lafayette Housing Authority to attend that meeting. those meetings are frequently, as many public hearings are, not well publicized or attended. And I think it's time for public input to be more robust around the PHA's activities. So please mark your calendars, July the 6th at 2:30. Anybody else have an announcement or a question? All right, well, we don't want AOC to have too much dead air in their rebroadcast of this meeting. So Elsa, do you want to talk about the next meeting and any other AHA meeting housekeeping right now?
Real quick, before Elsa does that, I do want to kind of set up a little bit of a teaser. Arch is starting a monthly email that will have advocacy opportunities, little action alerts, kind of like what Maxwell was putting in the chat today, opportunities for you to raise your voice in support of housing and housing related issues. So if you're not already on our email list, you might want to navigate over to Arch's Facebook or website and join the email list. Most of you guys are probably on it because you received this notice, or just ask me and I'll get you on it. But we'll be putting those action alerts into an email on a monthly basis. So you can stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and I want to answer first Clancy's question. The next Facebook Live is on, for Arch, is on June 9th at 6 p.m. And we're going to be talking about ALICE and the relationship between ALICE and housing and homelessness. So we've got some really special guests that we'll be announcing in the next couple days, but really excited to explore the intersection of that. And for those of you, I know most of you are familiar with ALICE, but for those of you who aren't, that's asset limited, income constrained, employed. And so, so for lack of a better expression, the working poor. The next Acadiana Housing Alliance meeting as a joint meeting with Arch will be Thursday, July 22nd at noon. And we'll be focusing on second quarter updates. I'm sure, as most of you remember, in March, we did the first quarter. So we'll be ready to go through and really highlight what's happened between March, April, and June. And so, we'll be excited to get all of the agencies who would like to participate in that overview together ahead of time. Please reach out if you are an agency that would like to report at that overview. So that's all I've got, Melinda.
Yeah, and just quickly a reminder that we have discussed and have not yet scheduled a meeting of a subcommittee for the AHA on housing counseling, which all of us recognize to be a very critical issue and need right now. So watch for that to be forthcoming. I'm sorry, I got a little sidetracked by a little flood. So when we get that on track, we'll reach out to everybody who may be interested. I actually just got a question from Emily with Step Up Acadiana about that. So
Melinda, the Facebook group for the Acadiana Housing Alliance, I'm working on reinvigorating it. So if you have not joined that, it's a private group so we can discuss things internally. So if you would like to sort of utilize social media as a way to connect throughout the months, please go ahead and add that. That's just Acadiana Housing Alliance. It's a group, and you just request to join, and I'll accept on the back end. But we'll be trying to make it a more robust presence on social media.
Thank you, Elsa. So go ahead, Kate. Clancy, sorry.
Yeah, okay. I am a member of the Zonta Club of Lafayette. It's sort of similar to Junior League. And we're starting out a project where we are going to be getting some children's backpacks and stuffing them with a lot of different things, not necessarily school supplies, but there will be some like art supplies and toiletries and, you know, little toys. It's probably all going to be gender neutral. That's kind of, I think, you know, the goal, so that any kids could enjoy them. And we're just looking for anybody who would like to have some of those. We're working with Faith House. We have an ongoing partnership with Faith House. But I wondered if, like Foster the Love or Share House or, any other nonprofits in town, Extra Mile, anything like that, would like to have some of these backpacks. So I'm going to put my email in the chat, and anybody who wants to write to me and say, hey, we would like, 25 filled backpacks or 50, just let me know.
Great. Thank you, Clancy. Anybody else? If not, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us, and hope to see you at the next Arch meeting or the Facebook Live, and look for that email from Elsa with all the great resources that Maxwell shared with us. And thank you so much, Maxwell, for joining us today. Really appreciate it. See you soon. Bye, everyone.